Thanks, Rev Kelly, for the reading this morning. As she said, that is from a new book, fairly new book, from Jill Lepore, These Truths, A History of the United States, which is the first attempt in a long time to write some kind of a comprehensive history of the U.S. that makes some sense thematically. And she tells you why that's been a problem right up front. The United States is founded on a set of ideas, but Americans have become so divided that they no longer agree, if they ever did, about what those ideas are or were. You know, we often hear a phrase that may not know that actually it's from the book of Proverbs that goes like this: where there is no vision, the people perish. Where there is no vision, the people perish. Vision, ideas, common ideas. Yeah, you see there's a problem here. Today, nationally and locally, we have a problem with vision. And I think that it's up to us to figure that out and to fix it. Dr. Lepore writes, in 1787 then, when Alexander Hamilton asked whether societies of men are really capable or not of establishing good government from reflection and choice, or whether they are forever destined to depend for their political constitutions on accident and force, that was the kind of question a scientist asks before beginning an experiment. Time alone would tell, but time has passed. The beginning has come to an end. So, science experiment, the U.S., can we govern by reflection and choice, or will it be accident and force? We're still asking the question, and I think we're teetering on the edge here now. I know some people ask, how did all this come crashing down so swiftly, so quickly? But really, for most Americans, unprivileged Americans, it's been crashing for a very, very long time. And we need to realize the frustration that's built into the rather constant failure of American government to have a vision and to have some kind of compassion for its citizens. And that is the theme for the month of June that I'm going to be exploring, compassion. We're going to look at several facets of compassion, how it works, who has it, who doesn't, what do you do with it. But right now, to think about compassion for our fellow citizens and how that could be the answer to Alexander Hamilton's question to us in the science experiment: can it work? I think it can, but it's not. In his poem titled On Another's Sorrow, the British poet William Blake gets at compassion, I think. He writes, "Can I see another's woe and not be in sorrow too? Can I see another's grief and not seek for kind relief? And not seek for kind relief." Now, let's think a bit about what compassion is. And, for a lot of us, I think the word compassion and the idea of Buddhism are pretty, in there together a lot of the times, because Buddhists talk so much about this idea of compassion. As a matter of fact, the twin goals in Buddhism is the cultivation of compassion and of wisdom, which you say, well, wait a minute. Yeah, I think, wisdom is something you really do have to work hard for, but compassion, isn't that just a feeling? And the answer is no. In Buddhism, you have to work for it. It's not just an emotion. It is a mode of being that has some results that come to it because of its very being and how it is. Gorompa Sonam Singh is a Tibetan Buddhist monk and philosopher from the 15th century, scholar, and he did a lot of thinking about what compassion means within the Buddhist tradition. Let me read a little piece from his work. The extensive and vast mind possessed of compassion for all beings, like love starting from the present mother and extending to the limits of space, must be cultivated to such a degree that it compares to that of a tearful person who sees or remembers that his or her only child has fallen into a pit of fire. A tearful person feeling like their only child has fallen into a pit of fire. That's compassion. That's what I am going to work for, is to feel that I am totally helpless and bereft. Why would I want that? Well, that's a good question. And it's why Buddhism is so often misconstrued and packaged wrong, labeled wrong in Western thinking. Compassion is not something that you buy by the pound or the half pound. Compassion is something cultivated and then that functions in the world in a particular way. The goal is to sit around there, yes, and meditate until you feel toward all sentient beings the sadness, the deep sense of suffering, and some compassion for that, as if your only child has fallen into a pit of fire. Now, the word for compassion in the earliest language of Buddhism, which is Pali, is karuna. Karuna. And it means sharing in suffering. Gorompa Sonam Singh recommends a technique that actually was also invented independently in the Western world by the Stoics. And it's an idea of concentric circles of love and always expanding. First, your love or loved ones, Gorompa Singh said, try to love them. That's not so very hard, is it? But then try to love your extended family. It's a little harder. Friends, strangers, enemies. That's a little harsh. And then true compassion for all sentient beings. Now, one of our Western challenges for understanding this term compassion is that our tradition doesn't have a long use of it. It hasn't settled into Western thinking nearly as much as it has settled into Eastern thinking. The Greek word for compassion was never translated into any European language. It simply disappeared, unlike most words for most concepts. So that in itself shows there's a little bit of wonkiness going on with this term. Our word for compassion originates in Latin, and the word is compati. Compati, to suffer with. Well, okay, to suffer with does sound a lot like that definition of karuna, sharing in suffering. So where's the difference in these two ways of thinking? Now, if you think about it, there are a couple of different ways we can suffer with or share in suffering. And therein lies, I think, the answer, because in the Western mind, those two ways are often confused. Professor of psychology Tara Well has done a good bit of thinking and researching in this area. And one place you can find a summary of her work is Psychology Today. It's an article online called Compassion is Better Than Empathy. Neuroscience Explains Why. Compassion is better than empathy. Neuroscience explains why. Now, Dr. Wells is a practicing Buddhist, so she's thought about this radically painful sort of compassion that Buddhists strive for. In her academic work, Dr. Wells explores the difference between compassion and empathy. Empathy. Wells is a neuroscientist, and she's discovered that compassion and empathy activate different parts of the brain. She writes this, quote, "Empathetic people feel the pain of others acutely." Oh, wait, that sounds like compassion, right? Empathetic people feel the pain of others acutely. As a matter of fact, she writes, too much empathy can be debilitating In the depths of empathy, we can become paralyzed, debilitating, and paralyzed. That's where empathy leads. Compassion, however, is, as she says, feeling for and not feeling with the other. In other words, we are confused when we talk about compassion fatigue. Compassion does not fatigue, it energizes. Actually, we suffer empathy fatigue, which isn't good for anybody because it makes us paralyzed. We need compassion. We need to feel for, but then get off our tuchus and do something about it. Compassion is about doing something about it. That poem that I quoted a bit ago by William Blake, let me do that again. Can I see another's woe and not be in sorrow too? Can I see another's grief and not seek for kind relief? Yeah. Sorrow is well and good, but it's empathy. The key is seeking kind relief. That is compassion. Now, we naturalistic thinkers, we who see that the universe is not something that functions on any sort of human scale or human understanding, it's something that's on its own, and we are on our own naturalistic thinking. You know, we're a minority in the human population, and I guess we always will be, which means that we need to reach out and find others who may not think exactly like us, but are in that naturalistic realm of things so that we can join with them in the hard work that we need to do. As humanism sees it, far from being a place of empty absurdity, the universe is a place where human compassion and human action matter in an ultimate sense. Probably someone has said that to you if you've expressed your naturalistic idea of the universe. Well, that's living in absurdity. There's no meaning. How can you do that? Well, we don't see the universe as absurd. We see the universe as a place where human compassion and human action matter in an ultimate sense, because what we feel and what we do create the only meaning and purpose that exists in the universe. That's the human scale. You know, and finally, that does put a little pressure on what we feel and what we do, doesn't it? Humanism is about how the self encounters the other, because with the Buddhists, we realize there is actually no other. There's only us. We are all one, together. For humanists, the encounter with the other is the baseline for our ethics. How do we encounter that which feels different from us? And how do we, through compassion, enter into a relationship with that other? Yes, that's an ideal, but it is an ideal worth striving for. In the monotheism, compassion is out there. In Judaism and Islam, God is referred to as the compassionate one. In Christianity, Jesus is the Lord of compassion. But we naturalist and kind of scientific types, we look around and we don't see any huge universal compassion going on. It's just us. Then here we are, wishing that there were a universal compassion. That would be nice, but we don't see it. We can't offload the duty onto some deity or projection. The realization is exactly why the Buddha talks so much about compassion. He realized that life is suffering, and he set about trying to ameliorate that as best he could. And we need to realize as well, everything changes all the time. That's one step toward realization. Everything changes all the time. Also, change is irreversible. It goes like an arrow only one way. And change is the root of our suffering. We don't want things to change. We want things to feel comfortable all the time. Realizing that that is not possible is a step toward exercising compassion. We All of us are the struggling immigrant, and we are the fire that consumes that immigrant's dreams. We are the African American brought in chains to a foreign country, then always treated as foreign in that country and a problem to be fixed. We are the natives and the impoverished Euro-Americans and the African Americans who cry out, "We've been in this nation since before it was a nation. Why are we still dirt poor?" We are the police officers enmeshed in a system that creates an us and a them that manifests itself in violence. We are the rich who grow richer and more remote from the suffering on the American streets. We are the gasoline and the fire. We are the problem, and we are the only possible solution, because we know that only human beings can fix human problems. Yeah, compassion hurts because it's an accusation. What are you doing? Compassion feels like your only child has fallen into a pit of fire. How would that make me feel? Hopeless, paralyzed, enraged? Yes, all of those are completely valid emotions in the situation, not to be suppressed, to be let out, and to be felt. But now, what am I going to do about it? Empathy paralyzes. Compassion energizes. The choices before us today are clear: reflection and choice, or accident and force. The experiment that Hamilton and others started is still going on. For the time being, it's still going on. They didn't know how it would turn out. We don't know how it will turn out, but we will decide how it turns out. This is an open question, but it's a question that can be answered by embracing compassion.
Thanks for listening. You can find much more about humanism and what's happening at First Unitarian Society in Minneapolis by visiting our website at firstunitarian.org.